rituals continued, the Chinese were encouraged to believe that life was as it had always been, in harmony with nature. But Kublai's motives were not entirely cynical. He did care about the well-being of the people who made up the most important part of the empire. The new emperor introduced tax exemptions for those trying to rebuild their homes. He built granaries, irrigation systems, and reclaimed land. He even passed a law preventing Mongols from grazing their horses on farming land. Surprising indeed from a grandson of Genghis Khan. But if the economy was to emerge from the gloom of war, it needed more than just prosperous agriculture. By nationalizing all the gold and silver mines throughout China, like this one, which dates from his time, Kublai set out to establish a government-controlled economy based around a large central exchequer. The mining or hoarding of all precious metals was forbidden. They were to be a state monopoly. From across the country, precious ore and even silver coins were transported under guard to the new state-operated mints. Here the ore was melted down and turned into imperial ingots. Soon a vast reserve of silver was produced in a variety of weights, each stamped with the official imperial mark. Kublai had effectively created a silver standard. Against these reserves, Kublai printed paper notes, which were distributed throughout the land in return for coins or silver. So, in a nation of over 50 million people, there was one official currency, and it was Kublai's. His was probably the first administration in the world to have what amounted to a central bank and a semi-planned economy. Kublai also knew that the key to a strong economy, then as now, was through production and trade. Chinese ceramics were greatly valued abroad, so he encouraged the establishment of potteries all across the south, near the great seaports. Kublai, the grandson of a nomadic horseman, issued licenses to every factory. He did everything he could to encourage production. Soon the countryside was shrouded in smoke from the hundreds of kilns that worked day and night to keep up supply. While artisans produced pottery, silks, silverware, carpets, furniture, and armaments, Kublai built a massive merchant fleet to carry them right around the Orient. He was great Khan of half the world, and he would take every advantage of it. His fleets, captained by skilled navigators, traded right across Southeast Asia to India, and even as far west as the Persian Gulf. Here in particular, in the cities of the Ilkhanate, Chinese pottery was always in demand. But it was the trade of ideas and technology that made this sea link so important. Here in the Gulf, Chinese merchants made a valuable discovery. The Persian artisans had developed a number of important new ceramic dyes. The most famous was cobalt. After it had been ground into a thin paste, the Persians used it to coat mud bricks before they were fired. In the kiln, this dull grey finish was transformed into a radiant blue, and the local builders were using these thick tiles to clad the outside of their domed buildings. In China, the cobalt, imported from the Persian Gulf, was used to produce the most delicate patterns. Under Kublai, Chinese potters were given free rein. They could illustrate any subject, as long as it was about hunting and horses. It was during this period that the first blue-white glazes were produced, the very best of Chinese pottery. It was a two-way trade. Chinese techniques soon influenced Persian artists. Buildings were decorated in ever more complex ceramics, and their designs reflected the Oriental influence. Though he never knew it, Kublai could take much of the credit. Kublai understood that trade across the breadth of Asia could be the means of binding the empire together. He poured fortunes into any number of projects to encourage trade. He expanded the great harbor here at Hangzhou, and each year thousands of ships were guided through the straits by a lighthouse near the mouth of the inner harbor. The old Sung capital became the most important trading center in the world. Against the wishes of his Chinese advisors, Kublai encouraged foreigners to come to his new China. Persian merchants from the Ilkhanate arrived, built trading houses, villas, and of course, mosques. Islam spread along the coastal cities, side by side with Hinduism, which arrived with merchants and craftsmen from the subcontinent. Arabs from the Gulf, Turks from Asia Minor, Russians from the Golden Horde. For the first time in her history, China was inundated with foreign cultures. The Mongol policy of religious tolerance under Kublai saw the spread of alien religions. And when the Pope agreed to establish an archbishopric in China, Kublai hailed it as evidence that his empire really was universal, and China was at the center of it. But it was Kublai's links with the great Italian city-states, and in particular Venice, that demonstrated his true internationalism. The Venetians had traded in Oriental cargoes for years, but only through Persian middlemen. But now there were encouraging reports that there was a safe overland route leading directly to Cathay. And Venetian merchants hoped to get there first. In 1271, Niccolo, Maffeo and Marco Polo set off from a house which once stood here. Their destination, the land of the great Khan. When they departed, the Venetians thought they might be away for 2 or 3 years. They were away for 17, and Marco Polo's book, written and illustrated on his eventual return, was closely studied by traders and medieval geographers. He described in detail his journey across Asia to Kublai's fabled city of Shangtu. There they were granted an audience with the great Khan and delivered letters of greeting from the Pope. The Polos were followed by other European merchants. To aid their journeys, Kublai built along the route 1,000 new post stations, or caravanserais. Each was provided with a hostelry, a granary, stables, and fresh pack animals. It was the start of a remarkable era in the history of trade. All along the great Khan's highways, hundreds of merchants traveled back and forth. For the first time, East traded with West, face to face. But the 1,000 caravanserais which Kublai built were as nothing compared to the great engineering projects he was initiating in China, like the Great Canal. It employed more than 3 million laborers and took more than 10 years to complete. The Great Canal was built to alleviate the persistent famines in northern China, where there was not enough arable land to support the population. But a canal that linked Hangzhou in the south with the great cities of the north would ensure imported supplies. For that, or any age, it was a remarkable feat of engineering. The canal was more than 150 miles long and had hundreds of locks, some of which are still there today. The canal was also cut deep enough to take ocean-going junks. Consequently, ships that had sailed the islands of Southeast Asia could navigate their way more than 100 miles inland. The canal reached towards a large inland port. It was all part of Kublai's great enterprise. At the end of the canal was a new city, bigger and more magnificent than the legendary Chengdu. This was the new capital of the new united China. Here, ships could deliver their cargo right to the Khan's door. 700 years later, there are still